Hello everybody, Mike here with just a quick video at the top of the show. Just wanted to apologise for the audio quality on this week's recording. The one side of the microphone wasn't picking up properly, so Hannah's side of the conversation sounds crystal clear, whereas my side sounds very echoey and boomy. So apologies about that, it was just an error, user error on my part, and everything should be returning to normal next week, but just wanted to let you know why that was on the video. So, yep. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I am Mike and with me as always is Hannah. How are you this evening, Hannah?
I am very well.
Very well.
We've had a little date night tonight.
We have?
I feel like I've lived a whole evening because we've been out for dinner before our kids went to bed.
Being the parents of barely pre-adolescent children means that there isn't a huge amount of variety in our lives, so we are having a less than typical evening, and it's quite nice to be able to podcast, and it feels like we're really getting one over on the world by being able to go out for dinner and then do something else. It's been a long time.
I feel like we're recording this in the middle of the night though.
Okay, well hopefully that won't affect the energy levels.
Yeah.
The
I'm no more tired than I usually am, so don't worry.
So yes, we are continuing on with Season 1 of Babylon 5, episode number 12, I believe we've reached.
Yep.
Tell me and our gentle listeners a little bit about said episode, Hannah.
This episode is called By Any Means Necessary. Synopsis says, while the station's dock workers stage an illegal strike, Jakar tries to hold a Narn religious ceremony, but Londo holds the plant he needs and won't relinquish it.
That sounds very Star Trek, doesn't it? It's kind of like the Enterprise is attacked by the Borg Queen. Meanwhile, Data learns how to dance, or Data learns about the meaning of friendship or something.
Yeah.
It's one of those great A plot, B plots. And who's behind this episode?
This episode is directed by Jim Johnston and written by KATHRYN M. Drennan and story edited by Larry DiTillio.
Okay. I might be wrong, but I think KATHRYN Drennan was J. Michael Straczynski's partner.
Right.
At the time, I think she wrote some of the Babylon 5 novels. And it's worth mentioning that Babylon 5, it didn't have a huge expanded universe when you compare it to, the mega franchises like, Star Wars, Star Trek. But the novels, I've got to say, if you're the sort of person who likes to dip into expanded materials, the Babylon 5 novels are excellent. They're really good, and they really expand the mythology of the show quite considerably. And I remember at the time, whenever you get Star Wars books or Star Trek books, there were always these kind of inconsequential, fun, but very much just an adventure that happened between certain episodes of the show and things like this. Whereas these are quite large events that you hear about in the show but never actually see. But that's worth mentioning. So,
like the Silmarillion of Babylon 5.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And also, because unlike certainly Star Trek, there's very much a singular auteur behind Babylon 5, and Straczynski was really involved in the expanded universe. I think he gave them the stories and was like, go, right, But again, we're back in standalone territory this week, but I do seem to remember quite liking this episode, so I'm looking forward to watching this.
Yeah, me too.
A couple of quick bits of housekeeping before we get to that, though. A reminder that we appreciate feedback. You can leave comments here on the YouTube channel, or alternatively, you can email us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Also, do check out the other film, television, music, and general pop culture related goodness that is also on this channel, in addition to our friend shows, including Stroker versus Punter, The Good, the Bad, and the Odd, Talk Without Rhythm, and Film Bastards. And also, we very much appreciate donations via PayPal, if you can afford to do so without causing yourself any financial hardship, because we certainly do not want that. And likes and subscribes make a really big difference as well, because the more people who subscribe, the higher the profile of the channel on YouTube, the more people who find it, the more people who contribute, and that is ultimately what this is all about, and is a wonderful motivator for doing these with a greater level of regularity. So do we have any feedback, Anna?
We do.
Cool.
From our regular feedbacker, Mike's Musings.
Awesome. It's always good to have a regular feedbacker.
Indeed. For Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it was Silver Surfer and
Jack Dubs.
Yeah. And now we have CPMF 2112. And Cool Daddy. He's quite a regular feedback too.
Yeah. So he is.
Okay, so he says this is in relation to our last episode, Survivors. This is the only listed credit in IMDb for the actress playing Leanna Kimmer.
She was pretty good as well.
Yeah, she was. Maybe she just decided it wasn't for her.
Yeah. It is crazy how these people do just, pop up sometimes. And you'll see that with writers and directors as well. I mean, Terrence Malick, one of the most respected filmmakers of all time, he came out with Badlands and I think Days of Heaven, and then didn't make another film for like 25 years. It's just, it happens sometimes.
Yeah. He goes on to say, it is amazing how much continuity JMS managed to get into a standalone episode. So true. And just, it goes to the level of detail that he's given the series as a whole, and how much thought and probably how much thought has gone into picking the writers that he's
and
used.
I wonder if there does come a point in the show where we stop getting other writers and the whole thing's written by JMS. And I think maybe he got to a point where he probably realised it was a false economy, because he probably had to spend so much time with the writers, giving them all
trying to fill them in. Yeah,
he's just like, I'll just do it myself.
Do it myself. Yeah. He ends with, Jerry Doyle unfortunately had a problem in real life with alcohol as well.
It's interesting because JMS did cast people who he knew could bring real life stuff, like Mira Furlan's experiences of essentially having to escape from the former Yugoslavia, in the middle of the night with her husband. She was, tremendously famous there. She was like the Meryl Streep of that part of the world. But of course, the Bosnian War. And her husband were both from. It was like a Romeo and Juliet, Montague Capulet thing. They were both from different sides of the war, and she had to escape to America. So when you see Delenn delivering these impassioned speeches, JMS was shrewd enough to hire somebody who he knew would be able to channel it. And it was funny, I listened to an interview with, actually it's a spoiler even to say, but an actor who will join the cast of Babylon 5 shortly, in the second season. And he was talking about Jerry Doyle, who played Michael Garibaldi, and he said he was Garibaldi. He said his life story, his whole kind of, having a drinking problem, JMS gave him a shot and was like, look, I think you can do this. I think you can turn your life around. He got him in the end, but he did. He was clean when he wasn't drinking when they did Babylon 5. Did
he go back to...
I don't know. He did die fairly young.
Oh, did he?
I say fairly young. He was in his 60s.
Right. That is very, very young.
But he was known as being... He was Garibaldi. He was the guy that everybody on the set loved, the life and soul of the party, but also really opinionated, and really kind of just wouldn't keep his mouth shut when he felt so strongly about something. And it was interesting as well because JMS said that JMS is extremely liberal and Jerry Doyle was a pretty conservative guy.
Right.
And they would argue like banshees about politics, but then as soon as they finished it'd be like, want to go and get lunch? Okay, and would absolutely be, fine about that.
But that's
back
good.
when people were able to do that,
I think that needs to happen more often. I have friends who have very different political standpoints to myself. And, although we don't agree with each other, we still give each other space to have those opinions and have, our own outlooks on things.
Yeah.
Bit of tolerance. It's good.
Yeah. And it's funny as well because one of the things that there's some great blooper reels. We should do a reaction video to them, actually. That'd be quite funny for Babylon 5. And you get the impression that, I say get the impression, I know this, is that Jerry Doyle was one of those guys who hung around with crew quite a lot, hung around with the stuntmen. And there's a bit where they're doing a scene, it's a really emotional one. And Garibaldi walks in and he's just got his trousers down in the scene, and you hear one of the crew go, "Oh, you're such an asshole," and it's just like, yeah, that's the kind of thing that was going on the set there. Cool. Okay, should we get to it, Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we're going to hit pause. We are going to watch By Any Means Necessary, the 12th episode of season 1 of Babylon 5, and then we'll come back and we will tell you what we thought about that. It'll be spoiler free, and until if and when we indicate otherwise. So we will be back in. Probably 30 seconds of your time and about 45 minutes of ours. So let's do this.
Yeah.
All right. And we are back. So we've just finished watching By Any Means Necessary, the 12th episode of Babylon 5's first season. Hannah, what are your initial thoughts on this episode?
I really enjoyed this one. I thought it, even though it is a standalone, the tension in it was great, and I quite enjoyed being sort of 3/4 of the way through it, wondering how they were going to solve it. You know, I liked the comedic relief of Londo and Jakar.
It's a very A plot, B plot.
Yeah, they're just classic grumpy old men, really. And work so well when they're just racking each other up.
Being petty.
Yeah, so petty. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole lot of it. I thought it was great. I thought everyone acted really well. I thought, the woman who played the guild spokesperson for the dock workers, really, she was great.
And it's interesting that it was a woman.
Yeah.
You would that seems... particularly when you consider when this was made, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah, no, it was really good. What about you?
Yeah, I really like this episode. I think this is a kind of a bit of a dark horse episode. It's one of those ones where it gets lumped in, with the season 1 standalones and all that. But I think this is one of the better ones for a number of reasons, because it's one of the things that really shows the difference between Babylon 5 and Star Trek. It's this idea that somebody has to make all of these wonderful toys. And that's not something that we've ever really thought about. In Star Trek and even in Star Wars, they're just there. They've got their spaceships and their ray guns and all that kind of stuff, and there's never any thought given to the fact that somebody has to make these things and it must be difficult. And the idea of labour and unions and how we value the people who, do these things. And there's a kind of an invisibility and I think almost a unintentional dehumanisation that we have of the people who do the things that we don't want to do. The people who, whether that be cleaners or firemen or social workers or people who just do the shit that a lot of people don't want to do, either because it's dangerous or laborious or whatever it might be. And I feel like this episode does it well. And also, I like the fact that our heroes, the Earth Force people, are in a dilemma where the people that they're sort of fighting against are right.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, that's very Star Trek, this idea of the moral dilemma.
And they want to be on the same side as them.
Yeah.
Like Garibaldi and Sinclair, they completely agree with what the workers are fighting for.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I think season 1 does really well, particularly in the standalones. In fact, almost exclusively in the standalones, is in dramatising just how difficult the job on Babylon 5 is. Not because they're getting into space battles or anything like that, but just the politics and the bureaucracy and the amount of people that they have to keep happy, who will have different agendas.
Well, showing the docs with the chaos that would obviously be there from the amount of, ships that they have coming in.
It would be bloody hard.
Yeah, it's hard work and logistically very complicated.
The other thing as well that impresses me about this episode is I think it's a very well staged episode. Like there's a lot of extras.
Yeah.
Like in the scene, how a lot of TV shows, particularly network shows in the 90s and the 80s, would always try to make a crowd look like a crowd, but with not enough people.
Like 4 people.
Yeah, it's like I always think about in Neighbours, whenever they have parties and you've got the same people walking past the camera again and again, kind of like, wow, it's packed in here, But here, it actually, when there was the scenes of the tension, there was a hell of a lot of people there.
It felt chaotic.
And it actually felt pretty well staged for a low-budget sci-fi show that was filmed in an abandoned factory, somewhere in California. So I just think that this episode on paper is pretty inconsequential, but I just think it was a nice, unique idea, very well executed. And I think even the weaker points of this episode kind of work for it, like the negotiator guy plays it very camp. Like his performance almost feels like the bad guy in like Mannequin on the Move or something. You know what I mean? Who will get
Mannequin on the Move.
That's
where you went.
No, but that type of movie where you've got some sniffy guy, and he'll usually
he's very
he'll usually like, oh my gosh, bristly kind of, and he makes no sense because there's no way that any negotiator would be just that much of a prick. Although it is suggested that there's an agenda.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the sort of the campness of his performance is actually quite entertaining and makes sense within the tone of the episode. But I think there are some really great performances. I think that the guy who plays the brother, who's the main
the senior foreman,
he's really good. And on the one hand, you could say, oh, it's the cliches, it's the kind of the Latino, the mustaches, all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, if you look at firemen in New York now, they look the same as the firemen when you see photographs from the late 19th century. They're still the mustachioed kind of... There is a tradition, and often there are certain industries and trades that are associated with people from certain backgrounds.
Yeah.
They are kind of associated with them, and I think that it doesn't seem completely unbelievable that even a couple of 100 years in the future, that would be the case, because a couple of 100 years in the past it was.
Yeah.
It is conceivable. So I just think that the combination of just how unusual it seemed, certainly at the time, to have a show that did pull the curtain back, and took the time to actually, because you don't think of labour rights as something that a 90s sci-fi show would cover. And for that reason alone, I think it's interesting that they did.
Yeah. I think it just fleshes out the political side of Babylon 5 a lot more. And I don't think it's any spoiler to say that the political situation
on Earth, particularly
timber, whatever, becomes much more of a front-running element of the show for a while.
Yeah.
So getting all these bits coming into it is just building that visual for everybody.
And there is very much, as is the case with all of these standalones, stuff in there.
Yeah, 100%.
Particularly around, and I'll be vague, about the politics of Earth, because we know that the current president is somewhat liberal, has pretty progressive ideas about collaborating with. He's into diversity basically, but we know that there's a growing movement on Earth that's isolationist. It's the classic thing, isn't it? Of why are we spending all this money to be in the United Nations when we've got troubles of our own at home? why are we putting men on the moon when we can't feed our own people?
Charity starts at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, on the surface, that's a reasonable argument. But like a lot of these things, if you scratch under the surface, there's usually more nefarious stuff happening there. Whether that be, like I say, people saying that we shouldn't be spending money on the space program. If you look at this stuff long enough, there's some racism in there.
And there'll be, gender bias. There'll be, there'll be all kinds of things going on there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where, you're never going to solve all of Earth's problems. It's like, if we wait until there isn't poverty, or we wait until there isn't war or child disease or anything like that before we start doing anything scientific, then we'll never do anything scientific. You've got to kind of... that's not how life is. You don't just completely solve a problem before moving on to the next thing. That's just, not how it works.
It's not possible.
But yeah, so a couple of things I want to point out specifically about this episode that I enjoyed or noticed is one thing about the opening narration that I like. I think I mentioned this before, but it really jumps out today. Is this idea that he says this is the story of the last of the Babylon stations. The way that it creates this sense of the story being told retroactively.
Yeah.
And I think a little bit like, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it creates the idea that this is a historical document.
It could be like a voiceover in a reel that you get at a history museum.
Yeah, like a Ken Burns sort of Civil War documentary or something.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think that just adds a kind of validity and a sense of, it gives the series a kind of novelistic feel.
Yeah.
Which, as people who have seen the show all the way through, people often do refer to Babylon 5 as the first live action sci-fi novel, and you're watching a chapter each week. So I think this might be the first, if not the first reference, the first time we've really got a sense of the centrality of Jaquan, who is one, although we learn he's one of a number of different... Yeah,
not the only...
Yeah.
It's a bit like Catholicism and Presbyterianism.
Yeah, they're not like monotheists, or, they're very much kind of... they've all got their own different guys.
I always think of Kwanzaa when I hear Jaquan.
Yeah, Jaquan. So, we see that there's... basically, this episode is talking about this idea of fatigue and tiredness is such a central... You've got Sinclair and you've got the dot workers as well. But even at the beginning of the episode, he's unshaven and he's tired.
Yeah.
And so much of Michael O'Hare's performance as Sinclair in this first season is just... What now?
Yeah.
And one of the things, although it is a subplot...
What fresh hell will it be today?
I know that I joke about the A plot, B plot, but they do, in a kind of Seinfeld-y way, the A plots and the B plots on Babylon 5 do usually either have some narrative or thematic connection. And here, in this episode, it's all... Both of the plots are there to demonstrate just how difficult Sinclair's job is.
Yeah.
You're constantly having to just deal with people and just have this sense of, could we all just be grown-ups, please? And can we all just get along?
Yeah, very much so.
And how difficult it is. But I think one of the things that's interesting about this episode is this idea that people on Earth are essentially trying to sabotage Babylon 5. Not literally, physically sabotage it, but
with the infrastructure and, infighting, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like get in the gaps in insidious ways rather than be overtly taking it down.
Yeah, because the whole idea of Babylon 5 is it's designed to create peaceful solutions. So scuppering that is the best way of completely derailing.
Yeah.
It's, and, the funding and money. I mean, ultimately...
It's all about power and money.
Yeah, this episode comes down to that. Again, I like the fact that it's a female character, and I think she's great in this as well.
She is really good. She, she's not hamming it up.
No.
I think.
She
does
really
a good job. Yeah.
And she's not kind of, and I know this sounds awful, but particularly back then, often strong women in TV shows were presented as being quite shrewish. And she's not.
No.
No. And also, this episode was written by a woman as well, and I think that you can tell.
Yeah.
Because she actually seems like somebody who has...
Believable as a character.
Yeah. You actually get a sense that she's got some kind of interior life, perhaps, And I also like the fact that they all just call in sick. They all basically just call in sickies, And
I'd never heard the term blue flu before I'd seen this, so it was good.
I've got my note here about just how buggered Sinclair looks throughout this episode as well.
His stubble is kind of impressive, how far up his face it comes.
And one line I love in this episode, and it almost feels slightly meta, and I love that it comes in a standalone, is when Londo says to Jakar, "This is revenge for Ragesh 3 and my nephew. What, did you think I've forgotten about that?" And it's almost like the show is saying to the audience, do you think we've forgotten about that? Because although, and you're absolutely right, that there's this kind of Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau thing going on with Jakar and Londo, they are still mortal enemies who have
they hate each other.
Legitimately done awful, murderous things to each other, Jakar was responsible for the abduction and forced confession of a family member of Londo, And Londo and the show is reminding us that don't get too cozy with their banter or as entertaining as it is. And also, just because this is a standalone episode of the show that isn't written by the showrunner, it's okay. We haven't forgotten about these things.
It's very much a reminder that you're in safe hands and that, okay, we're doing this thing about dock workers, but, we know what's happening.
Yeah.
And we've got this. Just sit back and watch it and enjoy.
I also like the fact that, like a lot of standalone episodes, it really informs your view of the regular characters in ways that the plot-driven and, kind of incident-driven, whiz-bang episodes can't. So, again, we get a sense that, somebody even says it, that Garibaldi's more of a blue-collar kind of... in the way... Michael O'Hare's character, Sinclair, is meant to be a kind of military-turned civil servant. But Garibaldi's basically like a cop, like a working class police officer, and that's the thing that's quite interesting about the show is although you've got all of these Earth Force or Earth Alliance people, they all come from very different backgrounds and they all kind of exist at different places in the class system because, of course, unlike Star Trek or unlike the Federation in Star Trek, they still have money. So class will still exist in a way that it just wouldn't in the utopian Gene Roddenberry world, know. So that results in there being the fact that Sinclair and Garibaldi do come from different classes.
Absolutely.
Sinclair would be more, I guess, not aristocratic, but more from that side of things, whereas Garibaldi would be more of a working class type person.
100%.
And again, I just think it gives more colours than you would get in Star Trek, where everybody is on an even keel.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a criticism of Star Trek. That's a strength of Star Trek, but it's definitely a difference.
Well, it is a difference. And in Star Trek, it wouldn't work so much if there was a class divide as well as a rank divide. That's where their system comes in, like who's captain, who's ensign, that kind of thing. Whereas in Babylon 5, because you have so much civilian versus military personnel, you need to have different classes mingling and getting that conflict coming up in different ways.
And it is interesting because in Deep Space Nine, you do start to see a bit more of that. Like O'Brien, they talk about how he's not an enlisted man. That's why they call him Chief.
Yeah.
So even Star Trek starts to bring a little bit of that in. But one of the things that this episode does really well also is something that it does have in common with Star Trek and makes the shows both really satisfying and entertaining to watch in the same way, is the simple joy of watching your characters successfully work a problem. And I think that one of the things that's great about shows like Star Trek and Babylon 5, and I think like shows like The West Wing do this as well, and hospital shows as well, is smart people working a problem. There's something just satisfying about that in a kind of like watching a piece of machinery, like a mousetrap kind of. There's a that's one of the reasons why I think procedural shows, like The Rookie, any of these shows, is watching capable people work through something. And that's what you see in this episode. There's a joy in seeing Sinclair play the small prince, intelligently and kind of win that game of chess or poker.
I mean, I used to love that in Parks and Recreation because whenever there was some kind of political issue that Leslie Knope would come up against, she would find a way around it.
Well, that's why people love legal dramas. That's one of the great appeals of legal shows, and why they always come back.
What was that short series we watched?
Murder One.
Murder One.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, it's almost like you enjoy it in the way that you enjoy the intricacies of a piece of clockwork.
Yeah.
It's for something very...
it's very satisfying seeing it all fall into place in the right way.
Yeah, it's like when you watch ASMR videos or something. You know what I mean? It's just like watching shapes being sliced or, it's just for some intrinsic need that I think is being serviced when you watch stuff like that, And that's something that I think JMS likes as well. I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a number of times when characters use the letter of the law in an ingenious, advantageous way, But any final thoughts on this, Helen, before we wrap up?
No, just a really solid episode, and I really enjoyed that we finished our date night watching it.
Yes, it was very good. And I guess the other thing I just want to mention briefly about this episode as well is it reminds me of a conversation we've had a couple of times, but where we talked about this with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where shows like this and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I think Buffy was a lot like these shows where you've got a certain status quo, and then the show will shift, and then they'll have to tell different types of stories. Yeah. So the status quo of the show at the moment is still essentially the same as it was when the show started. And I think that this episode is a really great, solid example of the type of stories you can tell in this version of Babylon 5. In season 1, this is where we are of the story, and then in season 2, events will change and dictate a different type of storytelling. And then later on in the show, events will transpire, which means that they have to tell other types of stories. Yeah. And I just think that the season 1 premise of the show allows certain types of stories to be told. And I think within that context, this is a really good one of them.
Fully agree.
What are you talking about next time, man?
The next episode is Signs and Portents.
Okay.
Londo obtains a priceless Centauri artifact, and a stranger visits each alien ambassador asking only one question. Right. It is directed by Janet Greek and written by JMS.
Oh, we're back in the world of JMS.
Back in the world of JMS.
Alrighty, so that's us for now, guys. A quick reminder that we do very much appreciate feedback, so please do leave comments here on the channel. Check out our friend shows. Likes and subscribes also very much appreciated, as are donations via PayPal, if you can afford to do so without causing yourself any financial hardship. You do that, and we'll be back very soon for episode 13 of Season 1 of Babylon 5, Signs and Portents. So until then, farewell.
See you later.